Welcome back to No, it's not Chucky Days at all. Welcome back to the Chuckster. So today I'm joined with my lovely madre.
Okay.
And we are going to be reading Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Now, I chose this because whenever I read this to Mum, it's always 10 times funnier because of Mum. She just pisses herself laughing, and then it makes me laugh, and hopefully it'll make you laugh too. So, if you haven't already watched or read the books of Harry Potter, reassess your life choices, and let's begin.
We're not going to read the whole book, though.
Not right now, no.
No, that's what I mean, though. We're not going to
Not
be
even
doing episodes of each chapter.
Yeah. Well, it won't even be like the whole thing. I'll just put in the juicy bits.
Okay.
Are you ready? Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. You're already cracking up.
It's just the way you say it. The boy who lived.
Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. They're the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. How's that funny?
It's the idea of a big beefy man with no neck. It's just...
Already, guys. Already.
Not my fault.
Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbours. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere.
Sorry. I can't help it.
Guys, I've done 2 paragraphs. It's taken us nearly 3 minutes to do 2 paragraphs.
Dudley. That's all. That's all I'll say.
The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret. And their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys arrived in the street. No, that's...
What?
I need to continue reading.
Okay.
The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbours would say if the Potters arrived in the street.
Oh. You missed out a whole sentence.
A whole line. I know. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never met him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull, grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum, and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realise what he'd seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove round the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, He couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups he saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak! The nerve of him! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later Mr. Dursley arrived at the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on the drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people, he made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood. Until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. The slots were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was only on his way back past them, clutching a large doughnut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb them, seized his telephone and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his moustache, thinking. No, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey, or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her, if he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realised that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, don't you dare speak, his face split into a wide smile.
I'll let you finish the paragraph. Got to go. You know I have.
Into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passers-by stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Can you just wait just until he gets home?
Shut. No, it's already 5 past.
Please, 5 more minutes.
No, it's already 5 past.
2 minutes.
I'll be watching.
Mum has to meet Dave, in case you're wondering. Why she's in such a hurry to leave
So
my fabulous
important.
videos. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He'd been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he'd been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behaviour? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had had a nice normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learnt a new word, shan't.
Yeah, go on.
Mr. Dursley tried to act normally, When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction ever since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating Bonfire Night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain, owls flying by daylight, mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and a whisper of the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. Stop!
Charlotte, I've got to. You know I have.
Okay. Well, since Mum doesn't love me, let's end it here.
Oh, God.
Did you enjoy your brief time here, even though there wasn't much juicy bits because you didn't stay?
I did, enormously, thank you.
Good.
But now I'm pissing off.
You have to wait for my outro.
Oh, sorry. Right, quick.
If you enjoyed this type of thing and want to see more, maybe continue with the story, with the mother who will stay next time.
Can I just say?
Yeah.
I thought you weren't going to be doing the story as such, you were just going to read the Dursleys.
I'm doing the whole thing, I'm just keeping in the bits that make us laugh.
Oh my God, it's going to take years. Not that that's a problem, obviously.
If you want more of this, please give this a big thumbs up and I'll try and get my mum to be more well behaved next time. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button down below and head over to Chucky Days if you want to see more of me, and I'll be going to upload this Saturday, so look out for that vlog, obviously once I've finished getting my healing vlogs out. Yeah.
Still doing that?
I know. What's next? Can you do my outro, please? Yes. Yes.
Cheesy wave! There we go.
You're the first person to ever do that.
What? That?
Cheesy wave, you know, and remember to do it.
Ah, okay.
Dad is just like, well, I don't watch your videos, I don't know.
Oh, well, you know, you always find support in the right place. Right.
Says the woman who wants to fuck off.
I know. I'm pissing off now.
Cheesy wave, guys. Subscribe. I bought it because of Harry Potter. So Slytherin green quill. I'm in Slytherin. And I also got some parchment to write it on. Because you know in Harry Potter they have parchment. Izzy and I are out at the sea. Here are the like toilets that are next to it to like get changed, get warm.